The deafening crack of gunfire shattered the evening stillness as Lillian Ashcroft spurred her mare harder, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. The Montana wilderness of 1876 stretched before her, a vast expanse of salvation and terror. Her once pristine riding dress was torn at the hem, caked with dust and sweat as she fled from the men who had once called her father boss. "There she is!" The shout came from behind, followed by another shot that splintered bark from a tree just inches from her head. Lillian ducked lower in the saddle, her golden hair streaming behind her like a banner. 6 days ago, she'd been the pampered daughter of Charles Ashcroft, cattle baron and unofficial king of Whitetail County. Now she was running for her life, branded a thief and worse by her own father. The sun was setting fast behind the jagged mountains, painting the sky in violent strokes of crimson and gold. Her mare was flagging, foam gathering at the bit as Lillian pushed the poor beast beyond endurance. She'd been riding since dawn, stopping only when absolutely necessary, always with the thunder of hoofbeats in the distance reminding her that rest meant capture. Ahead, the land dipped toward a rushing creek, beyond which rose the silhouette of a small ranch house. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising life, and perhaps, if she wasn't mistaken, for an outlaw herself sanctuary. A bullet whizzed past her ear as she plunged down the embankment. Her mare stumbled, nearly sending Lillian flying, but somehow regained its footing. The water splashed up to her knees as they forded the shallow creek, soaking her already filthy skirts and making them even heavier. "You can't run forever, Miss Ashcroft," hollered a familiar voice. Vernon Keller, her father's foreman for 15 years, and a man who'd once brought her peppermint sticks from town. Now he was hunting her like a criminal. As Lillian rode up the opposite bank, she cast a desperate glance over her shoulder. 5 riders gaining fast. Too fast. Her exhausted horse wouldn't make it to the ranch house before they caught her, but then she heard the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked. She jerked her head around to see a tall figure standing on the porch of the ranch house, Winchester raised and aimed. "That's far enough." The man's voice carried across the distance with unmistakable authority. He stepped off the porch, moving with the easy confidence of someone who knew the land and himself. His stance was wide, his aim steady. Lillian's pursuers pulled up short at the creek's edge, their horses dancing nervously beneath them. "This ain't your business, stranger," called Keller, his hand hovering near his pistol. "The girl's a thief. We're bringing her back to face justice." The stranger, a cowboy from his dress, though he carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd seen more than cattle drives, didn't lower his rifle. He moved closer to Lillian, who had finally pulled her exhausted horse to a stop. His eyes never left the men across the creek. "5 armed men chasing one woman doesn't look like justice to me," he replied evenly. "It looks like hunting." Lillian trembled in her saddle, unsure if she'd found salvation or merely traded one danger for another. The cowboy glanced at her briefly, just long enough for her to register eyes the color of a summer storm, before returning his attention to Keller and his men. "She stole valuable property from her father," Keller insisted, growing angrier. "Charles Ashcroft wants her brought back." "I don't care if she stole the crown jewels of England," the cowboy said, his voice hardening. He stepped in front of Lillian's horse, positioning himself between her and the men. "She's under my protection now. So unless you want to start a war you won't finish, I suggest you ride back to Ashcroft and tell him his daughter's safe. That's all he needs to know." The standoff stretched for what felt like eternity. Lillian could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel the exhaustion threatening to claim her as the adrenaline began to fade. If the men decided to charge, she doubted even this brave stranger could stop all 5, but something in his bearing must have convinced them. Keller spat a curse, then jerked his head at his companions. "This ain't over," he warned. "Ashcroft doesn't give up what's his." "Neither do I," the cowboy replied simply. They watched as the men wheeled their horses and rode back the way they'd come, disappearing into the gathering dusk. Only then did the cowboy lower his rifle and turn to Lillian. "Those men will be back," he said matter-of-factly. "With more guns, most likely." Lillian nodded, unable to find her voice. Now that the immediate danger had passed, her body was remembering 6 days of little food and less sleep. The world tilted alarmingly. The cowboy moved with surprising speed, catching her as she slipped from the saddle. His arms were strong, his chest solid against her cheek as darkness crowded the edges of her vision. "I'm not a thief," she managed to whisper before unconsciousness claimed her. "Never thought you were, madam," was the last thing she heard. When Lillian opened her eyes, she found herself lying on a narrow but comfortable bed in a small, neat room. A lamp burned low on a bedside table, casting warm light across unfamiliar surroundings. For one terrifying moment, she thought she might be back at her father's ranch, but the humble furnishings quickly dispelled that fear. She tried to sit up, but her body protested with aches in places she hadn't known could hurt. Her riding clothes had been replaced by a simple cotton nightgown, and her hair had been loosened from its pins. Modesty made her cheeks flush at the thought of a stranger undressing her, but practicality reminded her that her clothes had been filthy and wet. The door creaked open and a young woman with copper-colored hair peered in. "Oh, you're awake." Her smile was warm and genuinely relieved. Jackson was beginning to worry. "You've been asleep for nearly 18 hours. "Jackson," Lillian's voice was raspy from thirst. "My brother. He's the one who brought you in." The woman entered fully, carrying a tray with a steaming mug and a bowl of what smelled like stew. "I'm Emma Irwin. You're at Crosswind Ranch." Memories flooded back the chase, the creek, the cowboy with the steady aim standing between her and her father's men. "He saved my life," Lillian murmured. "That's Jack for you, always bringing home strays," Emma said with fond exasperation, "though you're certainly prettier than the usual 3-legged calf or orphaned wolf pup." She set the tray on Lillian's lap once she'd managed to sit up. "I hope you don't mind about your clothes. They were soaked through. I've washed them, but they needed mending." "Thank you." Lillian took a sip of the broth, which was rich and savory. "I'm Lillian Ashcroft," Emma nodded. "Jack told me your father is Charles Ashcroft, isn't he?" "The cattle baron who owns half the territory," Lillian tensed. "Yes, has your brother gone to inform him of my whereabouts?" "No." The voice came from the doorway, and Lillian looked up to see her rescuer. In the lamplight, she could properly see him for the first time. Jackson Irwin was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were indeed the gray of storm clouds, but with an unexpected gentleness that belied his intimidating stature. "I figured you were running from him for a reason." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest. His shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal muscular forearms marked with the occasional scar, the arms of a man who worked hard for his living. "I am," Lillian admitted, then hesitated. These strangers had saved her, clothed her, fed her. They deserved the truth, but old habits of caution were hard to break. "My father, he's not the man people think he is." "Most men aren't," Jackson replied evenly. "Eat your stew. When you're ready to talk, we'll listen. If you never want to speak of it, that's your right too." "But those men will be back, and we need to be prepared." "You've already risked enough," Lillian protested. "I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask," he interrupted. "I offered. There's a difference." Emma shot her brother an exasperated look. "What Jack means is that you're welcome here for as long as you need. We don't turn away people in trouble." Lillian looked between the siblings, overwhelmed by their kindness to a stranger. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. You don't know what I might have done." Jackson's expression softened slightly. "I know what I saw. 5 armed men hunting down one exhausted woman. That told me all I needed to know about which side was in the right." He pushed away from the doorframe. "Rest, eat, we'll talk in the morning." With that, he disappeared down the hallway. Emma shook her head fondly. "Don't mind him, he's not much for words, but his heart's in the right place." Lillian looked down at the stew, her appetite suddenly stronger. "He seems very certain." "Jack doesn't do anything halfway," Emma replied. "Once he decides on something, that's it." "And he's decided to help you." She patted Lillian's hand. "Which means you couldn't be safer if the entire United States cavalry was camped outside." Despite everything, Lillian found herself smiling. Is he always so? She searched for the right word: stubborn, intimidating, bossy. Emma suggested with a laugh. "I was going to say honorable," Lillian finished. Emma's expression grew serious. Yes, to a fault sometimes. She stood up. Finish your meal, I'll be back to check on you later. Left alone, Lillian ate her stew and considered her situation. She was still in danger, her father wouldn't give up easily, but for the first time in days, she felt something close to hope. By morning, Lillian felt strong enough to dress in her newly mended riding clothes and venture out of the bedroom. The Irwin ranch house was modest compared to her father's sprawling mansion, but it had a warmth that Charles Ashcroft's ostentation had never achieved. Handmade quilts draped over simple furniture, and watercolor landscapes signed with Emma's initials adorned the walls. She found Emma in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with practiced motions. "Good morning," Lillian said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. Emma looked up with a smile. "Good morning, you're looking much better. How do you feel?" "Like I've been dragged behind a horse for several days, but otherwise improved," Lillian replied with a small smile of her own. "Sit down, I'll pour you some coffee." Emma gestured to the kitchen table. "Jack's out checking the fences, but he should be back soon. Are you hungry?" Before Lillian could answer, the back door opened and Jackson entered, bringing with him the scents of horse, leather, and the fresh Montana air. He removed his hat, revealing hair damp with sweat, and nodded to Lillian. "You're up. Good. Thank you for everything you've done," Lillian said. "Both of you?" Jackson accepted a cup of coffee from his sister and sat at the table across from Lillian. "No need for thanks, but I do need to know what we're dealing with. Why is Charles Ashcroft sending armed men after his own daughter?" Lillian wrapped her hands around the mug Emma had placed before her, drawing strength from its warmth. "It's a long story." "We've got time," he replied. Taking a deep breath, Lillian began. "My mother died when I was 12. After that, my father changed. He'd always been stern, but he became hard. Cruel even, he built his cattle empire through methods I didn't understand as a child, but came to recognize as ruthless and often illegal." She sipped her coffee, organizing her thoughts. 2 weeks ago, I discovered something I wasn't meant to see. Documents in his study proof that he's been systematically forcing smaller ranchers off their land by damming streams, rustling cattle, even hiring men to threaten and intimidate families. Emma had stopped needing to listen, flour dusting her forearms. "That's terrible." "There's more," Lillian continued. "I also found letters suggesting he'd bribed territorial officials and may have been involved in the disappearance of a federal marshal who came to investigate complaints last year." Jackson's expression darkened. "Marshal James Sullivan?" Lillian's eyes widened. "You knew him. He helped me with some trouble a few years back. Good man." Jackson's jaw tightened. "He was found dead at the bottom of a ravine, his horse supposedly spooked and threw him." "My father arranged it," Lillian said quietly. "I found a receipt for payment to a man named Dawson, dated the day before the marshal died, with a note that simply said Sullivan problem resolved." Jackson exchanged a glance with his sister. "Illy Dawson is a gun for hire, nasty piece of work." "When I confronted my father," Lillian continued, "he laughed, said I'd always been too soft-hearted to understand business. When I threatened to take the documents to the authorities in Helena, he—" Her voice faltered. "He what?" Emma prompted gently. "He locked me in my room. Said he'd already arranged my marriage to Senator Harrington's son, a man twice my age with a reputation for cruelty that rivals my father's." Lillian's hands trembled. "The marriage would secure my father's political connections and ensure my silence. The ceremony was to be in 3 days." "So you escaped," Jackson concluded. Lillian nodded. "I climbed out my window using bedsheets. My horse was in the stable, a gift for my 21st birthday last month. I took nothing but the clothes on my back and the documents proving my father's crimes." She touched the small leather pouch hidden in her bodice. "I've been running ever since, trying to reach Helena, but my father's men picked up my trail 2 days ago." Jackson sat back, his expression unreadable. "And now you've led them to our doorstep." Lillian flinched. "I'm so sorry." "I never meant to bring danger to you. I'll leave as soon as—" "That's not what I meant," he interrupted. "I'm not blaming you, I'm assessing the situation." Emma placed a reassuring hand on Lillian's shoulder. "What Jack means is that we need to figure out how to get you safely to Helena with those documents." Lillian looked between them, bewildered. "You still want to help me, even knowing what my father is capable of, especially knowing that?" Jackson said firmly. He stood, pacing the small kitchen. Ashcroft's been buying up land all around us. 3 neighboring ranches have sold to him in the past year, good land, fair water rights, run by capable ranchers who suddenly decided to move east. His expression was grim. Now I understand why. You can't fight him, Lillian warned. Not alone. We won't be fighting alone if those documents make it to the right people, Jackson pointed out. But first, we need to make some preparations. Keller and his men could return any time. As if his words had summoned them, Emma suddenly tensed, looking out the kitchen window. Jack, she said quietly, riders coming, 6 of them. Jackson moved to the window, his body alert. It's Keller, all right, and he's brought more men. He turned to Lillian. Go upstairs. There's a loose floorboard under the rag rug in my room. Hide the documents there. Lillian hesitated. I won't hide while you face them. This isn't the time for pride, he said sharply. Those documents are the only evidence against your father. If they're lost, everything you've risked is for nothing. Recognizing the truth in his words, Lillian nodded and hurried upstairs. She found Jackson's room easily a spare, tidy space with a hand-carved bed and dresser. She located the rag rug, pulled it aside, and found the loose floorboard he'd mentioned. The leather pouch fit perfectly in the space beneath. When she returned downstairs, Jackson was checking his rifle while Emma loaded a shotgun. You know how to shoot? Jackson asked Lillian. Yes, she replied. Her father had insisted she learn, ironically enough, but I don't have a weapon. He reached to his belt and removed a revolver, checking it before handing it to her. It's loaded. Use it only if absolutely necessary. The sound of hooves grew louder, then stopped. A moment later, a voice called out, Irwin, we know you've got the Ashcroft girl. Send her out and there won't be any trouble. Jackson moved to the door, motioning for Emma and Lillian to stay back. That's close enough, Keller, he called through the closed door. State your business and then get off my land. My business is the girl, Keller replied. Mr. Ashcroft is mighty worried about his daughter. Says she's not well in the head, took some important papers and ran off during a fever spell. He just wants her home safe. Lillian felt sick at the lie. Her father was already setting the stage to discredit anything she might say. Funny, Jackson replied. She seems perfectly sound of mind to me, and she doesn't want to go with you. That's not your decision to make, Keller's voice hardened. She's coming with us one way or another. She's under my protection, Jackson stated firmly, and this is my land. You're trespassing? There was a pause, then Keller's voice again. Irwin, be reasonable. Ashcroft isn't a man you want as an enemy. He sent us to bring his daughter home peaceful-like, but if you force his hand. The threat hung in the air. Jackson turned to look at Lillian, a question in his eyes. She shook her head firmly. My answer stands, Jackson called out. The lady stays. Now get off my property before I consider this an act of aggression. The silence that followed was tense. Then came the sound of horses moving, not away but around the house. They're surrounding us, Emma whispered. Jackson nodded grimly. Get away from the windows. He moved to peer cautiously through a curtain. They're spreading out. This isn't good. Lillian's guilt intensified. This is my fault. I should just go with them and what? Marry a monster. Let your father get away with murder. Jackson's voice was low but intense. No, there's right and there's wrong, and sometimes you have to stand for something. A shot rang out, shattering a window on the far side of the house. Emma ducked instinctively. That was a warning, Jackson muttered. They want to scare us into giving you up. What do we do? Lillian asked. Jackson thought for a moment. Emma, take Lillian to the root cellar. There's a tunnel that leads out to the creek bed. It's narrow, but you'll fit. A tunnel? Lillian asked in surprise. This place was built during the Indian Troubles, Emma explained quickly. The previous owner dug it as an escape route. What about you? Lillian asked Jackson, sudden fear gripping her heart. I'll hold them off, give you time to get away. His expression was resolute. Emma knows the back trails. She can get you to the Miller place. They'll help you reach Helena. No, Lillian said firmly. I won't leave you to face them alone. This isn't a debate, Jackson replied. If those documents don't reach the authorities, your father wins. Everything, including whatever happens here today, will have been for nothing. Another shot hit the house, this one splintering the doorframe. Go now, Jackson urged, moving to position himself by a window with his rifle. Emma grabbed Lillian's hand. Come on, Jack can take care of himself. Torn between fear for her own life and fear for his, Lillian allowed Emma to pull her toward the kitchen pantry. Emma pushed aside several sacks of flour, revealing a trapdoor in the floor. Wait, Lillian said suddenly. She turned and rushed back to the main room where Jackson was preparing to return fire. What are you doing? He demanded. Get to safety. Instead, Lillian crossed to him and, acting on impulse, pressed a swift kiss to his cheek. Thank you, she whispered. Be careful. Something flickered in his storm-gray eyes, surprise and perhaps something warmer. Go, he said more gently this time. I'll find you when this is over. Lillian nodded and hurried back to Emma, who had the trapdoor open. The space below was dark, but Emma had already lit a lantern. As they descended into the cool, earthy darkness, the sound of gunfire erupted above them. Lillian flinched, her heart pounding with fear for Jackson. But Emma pulled her along the narrow tunnel, which smelled of damp soil and was barely tall enough for them to walk hunched over. He'll be all right, Emma assured her, though her own voice trembled slightly. Jack's been in worse scrapes. Lillian wanted desperately to believe her. The thought of Jackson being hurt or worse because of her made her physically ill. In just 2 days, this stern, honorable stranger had come to matter to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. After what felt like an eternity of crouching and shuffling through the darkness, the tunnel began to slope upward. Finally, Emma pushed against what looked like a solid dirt wall, revealing it to be a cleverly disguised door camouflaged with branches and undergrowth. They emerged into the fading daylight in a dry creek bed sheltered by overhanging willow branches. This way, Emma whispered, helping Lillian out of the tunnel. We need to reach the trees before they spot us. They crept along the creek bed, the sounds of gunfire growing fainter but still audible. Each shot made Lillian wince, imagining Jackson alone against 6 armed men. Once they reached the tree line, Emma led them deeper into the forest at a quick pace. The Miller place is about 4 miles east, she explained. Samuel Miller is a friend. He can get word to the marshal in Copper Creek. 4 miles, Lillian repeated, glancing back toward the ranch house, now hidden from view. How long will it take us on foot? At least 2 hours. Emma's expression softened with understanding. I'm worried about him too, but Jack knew what he was doing. He wouldn't have sent us away if he didn't have a plan. Lillian nodded, though unconvinced. Let's hurry then. They moved through the forest as quickly as they could, Emma clearly familiar with the terrain. The light was fading fast now, making the journey more treacherous, but also providing better cover. Tell me about your brother, Lillian said after they'd been walking in silence for nearly half an hour. Partly she wanted distraction from her worry, and partly she genuinely wanted to know more about the man who had risked everything for her. Emma smiled faintly. Jack's always been different. Our pa died when we were young, mining accident. Ma remarried, but our stepfather wasn't kind. Jack stood between him and me, took beatings meant for both of us. I'm sorry, Lillian said softly. Emma shrugged. It was a long time ago. Jack left home at 16, lied about his age to join the Union Army near the end of the war. Came back different, quieter, more serious. Worked cattle drives, then saved enough to buy Crosswind 5 years ago. Her voice held unmistakable pride. He built it from nothing, land nobody wanted because the water rights were disputed. He dug wells, built the house with his own hands. He's remarkable, Lillian observed. He is, Emma agreed, but lonely. He doesn't let many people close. She gave Lillian a sideways glance. That's why I was surprised to see him take such an interest in you. Lillian felt her cheeks warm. He was just being kind. Jack is fair and honorable to everyone, Emma replied, but he doesn't kiss everyone's hand or look at them the way he looks at you. Before Lillian could respond, a sound behind them made both women freeze. Hoofbeats approaching fast. Run, Emma whispered urgently. They broke into a sprint, but the forest floor was treacherous in the growing darkness. Lillian's foot caught on a root, sending her sprawling. She cried out as pain shot through her ankle. Emma rushed back to help her up. Can you walk? Lillian tested her weight and winced. Yes, but not quickly. The hoofbeats were closer now. Emma made a quick decision. Hide in those bushes, I'll draw them away, then circle back. No, Lillian protested. We should stay together. There's no time to argue. Emma helped Lillian into a dense thicket of undergrowth. Stay hidden no matter what you hear. Before Lillian could protest further, Emma dashed away, deliberately making noise to attract attention. Moments later, several riders thundered past Lillian's hiding place, following Emma's trail. Huddled in the bushes, her ankle throbbing, Lillian felt utterly helpless. Emma was in danger because of her. Jackson might already be. No, she couldn't think that way. She had to believe he was alive. Time passed agonizingly slowly. The forest grew dark, the temperature dropping steadily. Lillian shivered in her inadequate clothing, her injured ankle making any movement painful. She strained her ears for sounds of pursuit, but the forest had gone quiet except for the normal night noises of insects and the occasional owl. Should she try to continue toward the Miller Ranch alone? Or wait for Emma to return? And what if Emma had been captured? These questions circled endlessly in her mind as the hours crept by. Exhaustion and cold made her thoughts fuzzy. Just as she was considering attempting to move, a twig snapped nearby. Lillian held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the undergrowth. Footsteps approached a single person, moving cautiously. Friend or foe, she reached for the revolver Jackson had given her, her hand trembling. "Lillian?" The whisper was almost too soft to hear. "Lillian, it's me." Relief washed over her as she recognized Jackson's voice. "Here," she called softly, pushing aside branches to reveal her hiding place. He appeared like a shadow, kneeling beside her. Even in the darkness, she could see that his shirt was torn and blood-stained. "You're hurt," she gasped. "It's nothing. A graze." He touched her face gently, as if reassuring himself she was real. "Are you all right? Where's Emma?" Lillian's relief turned back to fear. "She led some riders away from me. I haven't seen her since." Jackson's expression tightened with worry, but his voice remained calm. "Emma knows these woods better than anyone. She'll be all right." He helped Lillian to her feet, steadying her when she winced at the pain in her ankle. "You're injured." "I fell. It's just twisted." She leaned against him, unable to suppress a shiver. "What happened at the ranch?" "How did you get away?" He wrapped an arm around her waist to support her weight. "Let's move. I'll tell you on the way." Together they began making their way through the forest, Jackson seemingly able to navigate in the darkness with uncanny accuracy. "Keller's men tried to rush the house," he explained as they walked. "I held them off long enough to set fire to the hayloft." "You burned your own barn." Lillian was aghast. She felt rather than saw his shrug. "Buildings can be rebuilt. The fire created enough confusion for me to slip away. I doubled back to try to find you and Emma." "I'm sorry about your ranch," Lillian said softly. "Don't be. It's not your fault your father is a tyrant." His arm tightened briefly around her waist. "Besides, a man who won't risk anything for what's right doesn't deserve what he has." They walked in silence for a while, Lillian becoming increasingly aware of his solid warmth beside her, the gentle strength in the arm supporting her. Despite the danger, despite her fear for Emma, she felt oddly safe. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "There's a line shack about a mile from here. We can rest there, tend to your ankle. And then we find Emma and get you to Helena with those documents." His simple determination was reassuring. "Do you always keep your promises, Jackson Irwin?" she asked. She felt him look down at her. "I try to," he said quietly. "And I promised you'd be safe under my protection. I aim to keep that promise." The line shack was little more than a one-room cabin used by cowboys during the winter months when checking on distant cattle. It was bare but sound, with a small stone fireplace, a narrow cot, and basic provisions. Jackson helped Lillian inside and eased her onto the cot before lighting a lamp and starting a fire in the hearth. The warm light revealed the full extent of his injuries, a bloody furrow along his left arm and a bruise darkening one cheek. "Let me see your ankle," he said, kneeling before her once the fire was crackling. Gently, he removed her boot and examined the swollen joint. His hands were calloused but surprisingly gentle, his touch clinical but respectful. "Not broken," he announced, "but a bad sprain. You should stay off it for a few days." Lillian gave a humorless laugh. "A luxury we don't have, we'll manage." He stood and moved to a small cupboard, retrieving a first aid kit. "I need to clean your scrapes." She hadn't even noticed the scratches on her hands and face from her fall, but now they stung as he carefully cleaned them with water and whiskey. "Your turn," she said when he'd finished, reaching for the kit. He hesitated, then nodded, sitting beside her on the cot. She pushed his torn sleeve aside to reveal the bullet graze on his upper arm. The wound wasn't deep but was still seeping blood. "This needs stitches," she said, examining it closer. "There's a needle and thread in the kit," he replied. Lillian raised her eyebrows. "You want me to stitch it? Unless you'd rather I do it left-handed." She bit her lip but nodded. Following his instructions, she sterilized the needle with the flame from the lamp, then threaded it with steady hands. "I've never done this before," she warned as she prepared to make the first stitch. "I trust you," he said simply. Those 3 words affected her more deeply than she expected. She took a steadying breath and began to stitch the wound closed. To his credit, Jackson barely flinched, though she knew it must be painful. As she worked, the intimacy of the situation struck her. Here she was, alone in a cabin with a man she barely knew, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, to smell the mixture of smoke, sweat, and something uniquely him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly, keeping her eyes on her work. "You've lost your barn, maybe your house. You're hurt, your sister is in danger, all for a stranger." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low and thoughtful. "When I came back from the war," he said, "I'd seen too much, done things I wasn't proud of. I promised myself that if I lived to come home, I'd try to be the kind of man who stood for something." He paused. "The kind of man who did what was right, even when it was hard." Lillian tied off the last stitch and cut the thread. "And this helping me is right." He turned to face her, their faces now inches apart. "Yes," he said simply. "You're brave, Lillian Ashcroft, braver than most men I've known. You're risking everything to expose the truth about your father, to help people you don't even know. How could I do any less?" The admiration in his eyes made her breath catch. No one had ever looked at her that way before, as if she were something remarkable, something worthy. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me as I am, not as Charles Ashcroft's daughter." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight parting of his lips. For one breathless moment, Lillian thought he might kiss her, then a sound outside made them both stiffen. Jackson was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle. "Stay here," he whispered, moving silently to the window. Lillian's heart pounded as she watched him peer cautiously through the curtain. Then, unexpectedly, his shoulders relaxed. "It's Emma," he said with evident relief, going to open the door. Emma stumbled in, looking exhausted but unharmed. "Thank God," she breathed, embracing her brother tightly. "I thought when I saw the smoke from the ranch I'm all right," he assured her. "What happened? Did they follow you?" Emma shook her head, accepting the cup of water Lillian handed her gratefully. "I led them in circles until they gave up. Been trying to find my way back ever since." She looked between them. "What's the plan now?" Jackson helped her to sit at the small table. "We need to get Lillian and those documents to Helena, but Keller's men will be watching all the main roads." "Sam Miller could help," Emma suggested. "He could take the documents." Jackson shook his head. "I'm not putting anyone else at risk, and the documents won't mean much without Lillian's testimony." "Then we need another route to Helena," Lillian said. "One they won't expect." A thoughtful expression crossed Jackson's face. "There is one way, through Blackfoot Pass," Emma gasped. "Jack, no, that's too dangerous, especially this time of year." "What's Blackfoot Pass?" Lillian asked. "A mountain trail," Jackson explained. "Treacherous in parts, but it would get us to Helena in 3 days instead of 5 by the main road, and Ashcroft's men won't think to look for us there." "Because most people wouldn't be crazy enough to try it," Emma muttered. Lillian looked between them. "Why is it so dangerous?" "Narrow trails along steep drops," Jackson said, "and there's still snow at the higher elevations, but I've done it before." "In summer," Emma pointed out, "with experienced guides." "We don't have many options," Jackson replied. "Ashcroft will have men watching every main road and settlement between here and Helena." Lillian considered this. "My ankle, I'll figure something out," Jackson said firmly. "The important thing is getting those documents to the territorial governor before your father can cover his tracks or send more men after us." Emma sighed, recognizing the set of her brother's jaw. When do we leave? First light, Jackson decided. We'll need supplies. There's a cache at the north boundary marker emergency provisions. I'll get them before dawn. You need to rest, Lillian protested. Looking at his injured arm, he gave her a faint smile. I'll rest when we reach Helena. Despite his insistence, Jackson did allow himself a few hours of sleep while Emma took the first watch. Lillian dozed fitfully on the cot, her dreams haunted by pursuing horsemen and her father's cold, angry face. She woke to gray pre-dawn light and the smell of coffee. Emma was heating a can of beans over the small fire while Jackson was nowhere to be seen. He left an hour ago, Emma said, noticing Lillian's searching gaze. Gone to get supplies. How's your ankle? Lillian tested it cautiously. Sore, but better. Good. You'll need all your strength for what's ahead. Emma handed her a tin cup of coffee. Jack's determined to see this through, once he sets his mind to something. He's stubborn, Lillian finished with a small smile. Relentless, Emma corrected, returning the smile. But in this case, he's right. Those documents need to reach the governor. She hesitated, then added, and I think there's another reason he's so determined. Lillian felt her cheeks warm under Emma's knowing gaze. I don't know what you mean. Emma just smiled and turned back to the beans. Of course not. Jackson returned as they were finishing their meager breakfast, carrying 2 bulging saddlebags. Any trouble? Emma asked, taking one of the bags. He shook his head. No sign of Keller or his men, but they'll figure out where we're headed eventually. We need to move. Within half an hour, they had packed what few supplies the line shack had to offer and were ready to leave. Jackson had fashioned a walking stick for Lillian from a sturdy branch, which helped her manage the uneven ground despite her injured ankle. As they left the relative safety of the shack, Lillian couldn't help but look back. Will you rebuild? She asked. After all this is over, Jackson followed her gaze. Yes, he said simply. That land is ours. No one's taking it from us. The fierce determination in his voice stirred something in Lillian admiration, certainly, but also a longing she'd never felt before. To belong somewhere so completely, to have someone fight for you with such unwavering certainty. They traveled in silence for the first few miles, staying off the trails and keeping to the cover of the trees when possible. Jackson led the way, Emma brought up the rear, and Lillian walked between them, struggling to keep pace despite her ankle. Neither Irwin's sibling complained or suggested slowing down, though Lillian knew she was delaying them. By midday, the terrain had begun to change, rising steadily as they approached the foothills of the mountains. The spring vegetation was lush here, wildflowers dotting the meadows they occasionally crossed. During a brief rest by a clear stream, Lillian found herself alone with Jackson while Emma went to refill their canteens. I'm slowing you down, she said, frustrated with her own weakness. He looked up from checking his rifle. We're making good time. You could move twice as fast without me. That wasn't the agreement. He set the rifle aside. I said I'd get you safely to Helena. That means all of us together, Lillian sighed, stretching her sore leg. I'm not used to this. To any of this, she gestured to the wilderness around them. I've lived my whole life with servants and carriages, and she trailed off, suddenly embarrassed by her own privilege. To her surprise, Jackson smiled a real smile that transformed his serious face. You're doing fine, better than fine. The smile faded, replaced by something more solemn. You could have stayed in your father's house, married the senator's son, lived in comfort. Instead, you chose this. He gestured to the wilderness, the danger, the uncertainty ahead. That takes more courage than most people ever show. His words warmed her from within, chasing away some of the fatigue and doubt. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing me that way. Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Emma returned with the water, breaking the moment. We should keep moving, Jackson said, standing and offering Lillian his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet, and if their hands remained linked a moment longer than necessary, neither of them acknowledged it. The afternoon brought steeper climbs and increasingly difficult terrain. By the time Jackson called a halt for the night, Lillian was exhausted, her ankle throbbing despite the walking stick's support. They made camp in a sheltered hollow between 2 ridges, where Jackson deemed it safe enough to risk a small fire. After a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Emma quickly fell asleep, wrapped in one of the blankets from Jackson's supply cache. Lillian sat by the fire, too weary to sleep, watching the flames dance. Jackson took a seat beside her, offering her a cup of coffee. "It will get harder from here," he said quietly, mindful of his sleeping sister. "The real climb begins tomorrow," Lillian nodded, warming her hands on the cup. "Tell me about Helena," she said. "I've never been, it's growing fast. Gold brought people at first, but it's becoming a real city now. There are actual streets, not just mud tracks, a few fine buildings." He took a sip of his own coffee. "The territorial governor has an office there. Governor Potts is a fair man, from what I hear. He'll listen to you." "If we make it," Lillian said, "we'll make it." His certainty was comforting. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the fire crackling between them and the vast Montana night sky wheeling overhead, brilliant with stars. "What will you do?" Jackson asked eventually. "After this is over, I mean." The question caught Lillian off guard. She'd been so focused on escape, on survival, she hadn't thought beyond delivering the documents. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go home, obviously. I have a little money of my own, a legacy from my mother, but it's in a bank in St. Louis." She stared into the fire, contemplating a future suddenly uncharted. "I could go east, perhaps, start over." The thought brought no joy, only a hollow uncertainty. The East was unknown to her, full of strangers and unfamiliar ways. "Or you could stay," Jackson said, his voice so low she almost didn't hear it. She looked up, finding his eyes on her, steady and serious. "Stay in Montana. It's a good place." His gaze dropped to the fire. "Once your father's influence is broken, there will be opportunities, land available. Communities that need teachers, or—" He trailed off, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "Or," she prompted softly. He looked at her again, something vulnerable in his expression that she hadn't seen before. "Or partners, for those rebuilding." The word partners hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Lillian's heart quickened. "I don't know the first thing about ranching," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're a quick learner." The corner of his mouth lifted in a half smile. "And I'm a patient teacher." The implication was clear now, impossible to misinterpret. He was offering her a place, a future with him, not out of pity or obligation, but because he wanted her there. "Jackson," she began, not quite sure what she meant to say. He shook his head slightly. "You don't need to answer now, or ever if you don't want to. Just consider it when this is all over." Before she could respond, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond their campfire. Jackson was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "What is it?" Lillian whispered, fear replacing the warmth that had been building inside her. "Don't know," he murmured, scanning the darkness. "Wake Emma." Quietly, Lillian crawled to where Emma was sleeping and gently shook her shoulder. The younger woman woke instantly, alert to the tension. What she began, but Jackson gestured for silence. For several tense minutes, they remained frozen, listening. Then came the unmistakable sound of horses approaching not on a trail, but picking their way carefully through the underbrush, as if their riders were trying to move quietly. "Keller," Jackson whispered, "they must have found our trail." "How?" Emma asked, hastily gathering her few belongings. "Doesn't matter now, we need to move." Jackson kicked dirt over their small fire, extinguishing it. "There's a cave system not far from here, we can lose them in there." In the sudden darkness, Lillian felt Jackson's hand find hers. "Stay close," he murmured. "Step where I step." With only starlight to guide them, they moved silently away from their campsite, heading deeper into the rocky foothills. Lillian's ankle protested the uneven ground, but fear gave her strength. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. "They're gaining," Emma whispered. "Almost there," Jackson replied, his grip on Lillian's hand tightening. The terrain grew increasingly rocky, with steep inclines that made progress difficult. Just as Lillian thought her ankle would give out entirely, Jackson pulled them into the shadow of a massive outcropping. "Here," he said, guiding them toward what appeared to be a solid rock face. But as they drew closer, Lillian saw that there was a narrow opening, a crevice barely wide enough for a person to slip through. "Inside," Jackson urged. "Quickly." Emma went first, then Lillian, with Jackson following last. The passage was tight, scraping their shoulders, but it opened into a larger space that smelled of earth and stone. It was pitch black inside, impossible to see anything. "Don't move," Jackson whispered. "There are drop-offs." They stood still, listening to the sounds of their pursuers drawing near, voices carried on the night air Keller giving orders, men spreading out to search. "They'll find the campsite," Emma whispered, "and our tracks leading this way." "Let them," Jackson replied. He fumbled in his pack and produced a match, which he struck against the cave wall. The flare of light revealed a large cavern with multiple passages leading off in different directions. These caves run for miles under the mountains. Local tribes used them to escape enemies for generations. He lit a small candle stub from his pack, then carefully moved to examine the various passages. "This way," he said, indicating the leftmost tunnel. They moved deeper into the cave system, Jackson leading with the candle, Emma in the middle, and Lillian bringing up the rear. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes narrowing until they had to turn sideways to squeeze through, other times opening into chambers large enough to stand upright. Behind them, they could hear faint shouts echoing their pursuers had found the cave entrance. "Will they follow us in here?" Lillian asked, her voice barely audible. "They might try," Jackson answered, "but without knowing the caves, they'll get lost, or worse." The grim implication hung in the air. These caves were dangerous to those who didn't know their secrets. They continued on for what felt like hours, the passage gradually sloping upward. Lillian's legs burned with exertion, and her injured ankle had gone from painful to nearly numb. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, the passage opened into a small chamber with a trickle of water running down one wall. "We'll rest here," Jackson decided, setting the candle on a rock ledge. Lillian sank gratefully to the ground, stretching her leg out. Emma knelt by the water trickle, filling their canteens. "How long do we need to stay in these caves?" Lillian asked. "Until morning at least," Jackson replied, checking his rifle by the dim candlelight. "Then we can exit higher up the mountain and continue to the pass." Emma handed water to both of them. "You should look at Lillian's ankle," she told her brother. "She's been limping worse for the last mile." Jackson knelt beside Lillian, gently removing her boot and examining her ankle by the candlelight. His touch was careful, but she still winced as he probed the swollen joint. "It's not good," he said finally. "The walking has made it worse." "I can manage," Lillian insisted. Jackson shook his head. "Not up the pass, you can't." He sat back on his heels, thinking. "There's a trapper's cabin near the eastern exit of these caves. If we can make it there, you could rest while Emma and I continue to Helena with the documents." "No," Lillian said immediately. "I need to testify in person. The documents alone might not be enough." More quietly, she added, "And I won't let you face my father's wrath without me. This is my fight." Jackson studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we'll need to find you a horse. You can't walk all the way to Helena on this ankle." "Where are we going to find a horse in these mountains?" Emma asked practically. A small smile crossed Jackson's face. "I know some folks up here, people who prefer the mountains to the valleys. They might help us." "Mountain folk?" Emma looked skeptical. "They're not exactly known for welcoming strangers, Jack. Old Jim Mackenzie still owes me for pulling his grandson from the river last spring," Jackson replied. "His place isn't far from the East Cave exit. He's got horses." The plan decided, they settled down to rest, taking turns keeping watch despite the relative safety of their hidden position. When it was Lillian's turn, she sat with her back against the cool cave wall, listening to the distant drip of water and the soft breathing of the Irwin siblings. In the dim candlelight, she studied Jackson's sleeping face. Relaxed in slumber, he looked younger, the habitual sternness softened. What would it be like, she wondered, to see that face every morning, to build a life with someone so steadfast, so principled? The thought sent a warm flutter through her chest. She barely knew him, yet she trusted him with her life. More than that, she admired him in a way she'd never admired anyone before. His courage, his quiet determination, his unwavering sense of right and wrong, these were rare qualities in a world where men like her father thrived by bending others to their will. When morning came, or what they assumed was morning, with no sun to guide them, they continued their journey through the caves. The passage eventually began to slope downward, and the air grew fresher, suggesting they were nearing an exit. Finally, they emerged from a narrow opening high on the mountainside. The morning sun was dazzling after the darkness of the caves, and the view was spectacular, rolling mountains stretching to the horizon, valleys still misty in the early light. "Where are we?" Lillian asked, shielding her eyes. "Eastern side of the Blackfoot Range," Jackson replied. "Mackenzie's place is down there in that valley." He pointed to a distant smudge of green among the pines. The descent was slow, with Jackson and Emma taking turns supporting Lillian. By the time they reached the valley floor, the sun was high overhead, and Lillian's ankle was throbbing unmercifully. Mackenzie's place turned out to be a sturdy log cabin surrounded by a small clearing. Several horses grazed in a rough corral, and smoke rose from the chimney. As they approached, a bearded old man emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand. "That's far enough," he called. Then, squinting, "That you, Irwin?" "It's me, Jim," Jackson replied, raising his empty hands to show he was no threat. "We need help." The old man lowered his rifle slightly. "What kind of trouble you in, boy?" "The kind that involves Charles Ashcroft and some very important documents," Jackson answered honestly. Mackenzie's bushy eyebrows rose. "Ashcroft, that old vulture?" He spat on the ground, then jerked his head toward the cabin. "Well, come on then. Any enemy of Ashcroft is welcome here." Inside the cabin, they explained their situation while Mackenzie's wife, a tiny, fierce-looking woman with silver hair, tended to Lillian's ankle with a poultice of herbs that smelled awful but brought blessed relief. "Ashcroft's been trying to buy my grazing rights for years," Mackenzie growled when they'd finished their story. "Sent some fancy lawyer up here last fall with papers and threats. I ran him off with a shotgun." He looked at Lillian with newfound respect. Didn't expect his own daughter would be the one to bring him down. "I need to get these documents to Governor Potts," Lillian said, touching the pouch hidden in her bodice, "before my father can cover his tracks or send more men after us." Mackenzie nodded thoughtfully. "You'll need horses." "And supplies?" He glanced at his wife, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I can spare 2 horses, not my best, mind you, but solid mountain stock, sure-footed on the pass." "We can pay you," Jackson began, but Mackenzie waved him off. "Consider it payment for what you're doing." Ashcroft's been a thorn in the side of honest folk in this territory for too long. They spent the night at Mackenzie's cabin, resting and preparing for the final leg of their journey. The old man warned them that the pass would be difficult, narrow trails, steep drops, and lingering snow at the highest elevations. "But it's the quickest way to Helena," he assured them. "And Ashcroft's men won't think to look for you up there. They'll be watching the main roads." The next morning, they set out at first light, mounted on Mackenzie's sturdy mountain ponies, Lillian and Emma on one, Jackson on the other. Mackenzie had provided them with warm clothing, extra food, and detailed instructions on navigating the pass. "Godspeed," the old man called as they rode away. "And when you bring Ashcroft down, remember old Jim Mackenzie who helped you do it." The trail to Blackfoot Pass started gently enough, winding through pine forests and mountain meadows. But as they climbed higher, it became increasingly treacherous, narrowing until at times it seemed no wider than the horses' hooves, with sheer drops on one side that made Lillian dizzy to look at. Jackson rode ahead, testing the path, while Emma held the reins of their horse, allowing Lillian to focus on staying balanced. Despite her fear, Lillian couldn't help but be awed by the wild beauty surrounding them: snow-capped peaks, eagles soaring on thermals, valleys spread out below like patchwork quilts. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the highest part of the pass. Snow lingered in patches, and the air was thin and cold. Their progress slowed as the horses picked their way carefully across icy stretches of trail. "Almost there," Jackson called back encouragingly. "Once we crest this ridge, it's downhill to Helena." Just as the words left his mouth, a sound like distant thunder reached them. Jackson reined in his horse, listening intently. "What is it?" Emma asked, pulling their mount to a stop as well. "Riders," Jackson said grimly. "Coming up the eastern approach. My father's men." Lillian asked, fear clutching at her heart. Jackson nodded. "Must have guessed we'd try the pass after all." "How many?" Emma wanted to know. "Can't tell from the sound. At least 3, maybe more." Jackson surveyed their surroundings, calculating. There's a side trail about half a mile back. It's rougher, follows a game path down to Elk Creek. Can the horses manage it? Lillian asked. They'll have to. Jackson turned his mount around. Come on, we need to reach that trail before they see us. They retraced their steps as quickly as they dared, the sounds of pursuit growing steadily louder. Finally, Jackson pointed to a barely visible path branching off the main trail. There, he said. It's narrow, but it will get us down to the valley. The path was little more than a deer trail, winding precariously down a steep incline. Jackson dismounted to lead his horse, and Emma did the same with theirs, helping Lillian down carefully. Stay close to the mountain, Jackson instructed. Don't look down. They made their way slowly, the horses snorting nervously at the unfamiliar footing. Behind and above them, they could hear voices now. Keller's men had reached the main trail. They'll see our tracks in the snow, Emma whispered. Can't be helped, Jackson replied. We just need to stay ahead of them. The descent was agonizing. Every step had to be carefully placed, every handhold tested. Lillian's injured ankle screamed in protest, but she bit back any sound that might give away their position. Her riding dress, already torn and dirty, caught on thorny bushes that lined the narrow path. Suddenly, a shout from above indicated their pursuers had spotted their tracks. Moments later, a shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off rocks nearby. They've seen us, Jackson said grimly. Move faster. They abandoned caution for speed, half sliding down the steepest sections. Another shot came closer, splintering bark from a pine tree just above Lillian's head. Get down, Jackson shouted, pushing Lillian and Emma toward a cluster of boulders while he drew his rifle. Taking cover behind the rocks, they watched as Jackson aimed carefully up the slope. He fired once, twice. A cry of pain suggested at least one shot had found its mark. That will slow them, he said, rejoining them, but we need to keep moving. They continued their desperate descent, the game trail eventually widening enough to remount the horses. As they reached more level ground, they urged the mountain ponies to a gallop across a meadow toward a dense stand of trees. Behind them, riders appeared at the edge of the descent. More shots followed, but they were out of effective range now, the bullets falling short. The trees will give us cover, Jackson called. Once we're through, it's a straight shot to Helena. They plunged into the forest, following what appeared to be an old logging trail. The dense canopy overhead blocked much of the daylight, creating a green-tinged twilight. They rode hard, trusting the horses to find sure footing, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. Finally, the trees began to thin, and through gaps in the foliage, they could see buildings in the distance. Helena sprawling across the valley floor. We made it, Emma breathed. But as they emerged from the forest onto a wider trail, Jackson suddenly pulled his horse to a halt, raising his hand in warning. Ahead, where the trail joined a proper road leading into town, waited 3 mounted men. Even at this distance, Lillian recognized the middle rider as Ellie Dawson, her father's hired gun. They guessed our destination, Jackson said quietly, cut across country to intercept us. What do we do now? Emma asked, fear evident in her voice. Jackson studied the terrain, considering their options. There's no way around without being seen. We'll have to break through. They're armed, Lillian pointed out, and Dawson is a killer. I know. Jackson checked his rifle, then handed it to Emma. You're the better shot, cover us. To Lillian, he said, hold on tight. When I give the word, we ride straight at them fast as these horses can manage. They won't expect that. Lillian nodded, wrapping her arms tightly around Emma's waist. Fear made her lightheaded, but she was determined not to falter now, not when they were so close. Jackson drew his revolver. Ready? Emma nodded grimly, raising the rifle. Now, Jackson shouted, spurring his horse forward. They burst from the cover of the trees at a full gallop, charging directly at the waiting men. Surprise bought them precious seconds, enough time to close half the distance before Dawson and his companions recovered and drew their weapons. Emma fired the rifle, the shot going wide but forcing the men to duck. Dawson fired back, his bullet whistling past Jackson's ear. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion for Lillian. Jackson fired twice in quick succession, hitting one of Dawson's men in the shoulder, sending him tumbling from his saddle. Dawson himself took aim at Jackson, his expression coldly determined. Without thinking, Lillian grabbed Emma's pistol from its holster and fired at Dawson. Her shot missed, but it distracted him just enough that his bullet meant for Jackson instead struck his horse. The animal screamed in pain, stumbling and nearly throwing its rider. Jackson managed to stay mounted, urging his wounded horse forward. They were almost upon the remaining men now. Dawson fired again, this time at Lillian and Emma. Lillian felt the bullet pass so close it stirred her hair, then they were crashing through, horses shoulder to shoulder, the remaining men scattering to avoid the collision. Jackson's wounded mount stumbled again but kept running, blood streaming from its flank. "Keep going," Jackson shouted. "Don't stop for anything." They thundered down the road toward Helena, the buildings growing larger with each stride. Behind them, they could hear hoofbeats as Dawson and his remaining man gave chase. Jackson's wounded horse was flagging, falling behind despite his urging. Looking back, Lillian saw Dawson gaining on him, gun raised. "Emma," she cried in warning. Emma twisted in the saddle, raising the rifle one-handed while controlling their horse with the other. She fired, the shot striking Dawson's horse in the leg. The animal went down hard, throwing Dawson clear, but the effort cost them precious speed. The remaining gunman was still pursuing, now closing in on Jackson's wounded mount. They were entering the outskirts of Helena now, passing scattered buildings and startled pedestrians. The gunman, perhaps wary of witnesses, held his fire but continued the pursuit. The governor's mansion. Jackson called, pointing ahead to a large white building set back from the main street. "Get there. I'll hold them off." He pulled his failing horse to the side, dismounting in one fluid motion and taking cover behind a water trough. As Emma and Lillian rode on, Lillian looked back to see Jackson exchanging fire with their pursuer, forcing the man to take cover. Emma guided their horse straight to the governor's mansion, ignoring shouts and stares from townspeople. Two guards at the gate moved to intercept them, but Emma called out, "We need to see Governor Potts immediately. It's a matter of life and death." Lillian slid from the horse, wincing as her injured ankle took her weight. She pulled the leather pouch from her bodice. "I have evidence of corruption and murder involving Charles Ashcroft," she told the startled guards. "Please, the governor must see these documents." The commotion attracted more attention. A distinguished-looking man in a fine suit appeared on the mansion steps. "What's all this?" he demanded. "Governor Potts," Emma said urgently. "This is Lillian Ashcroft. She has evidence against her father, documents proving his crimes." The governor's eyebrows rose at the name Ashcroft. "Bring her inside," he ordered the guards, then looked past them with concern. "And what is that disturbance?" In the distance, they could still hear gunfire. Lillian's heart clenched with fear for Jackson. "My friend," she told the governor, "he's holding off men sent to stop us from reaching you." Governor Potts turned to one of his aides. "Send the sheriff and his deputies immediately." Inside the governor's mansion, Lillian handed over the documents with trembling hands, explaining their contents and her own eyewitness testimony. Governor Potts listened gravely, examining each paper with care. "These are serious allegations, Miss Ashcroft," he said finally. "If true, and these documents certainly suggest they are, your father has much to answer for." "They're true, sir," Lillian affirmed. "I witnessed many of these events myself, and there are others who will testify once they know they're safe from my father's influence." The governor nodded thoughtfully. "I believe you. These will be investigated thoroughly, and if the evidence holds, Charles Ashcroft will face justice." He looked at Lillian with compassion. "You've shown remarkable courage, young lady." At that moment, the mansion doors opened, and Jackson was escorted in by the sheriff. His shirt was torn and bloodied, a fresh cut on his cheekbone, but he was alive. Lillian felt relief wash over her with such intensity she nearly collapsed. "Jackson," she breathed, limping toward him. He looked up, his tired face lighting with relief at the sight of her. "You made it," he said simply. "We both did," she replied, reaching for his hand. "Thanks to you." Governor Potts approached, looking Jackson over with interest. "You must be the friend who held off Ashcroft's men." Jackson straightened, nodding respectfully. Jackson Irwin, sir. My sister Emma and I helped Miss Ashcroft reach you with those documents. At considerable risk to yourselves, I understand, the governor observed. The sheriff tells me you single-handedly held off 2 armed men until his deputies arrived. Jackson shrugged modestly. I did what was necessary. Indeed you did, Governor Potts said warmly. Montana Territory needs more men like you, Mr. Irwin. He turned to address them all. You'll be my guests tonight. Tomorrow, once I've reviewed these documents more thoroughly, we'll discuss next steps. Charles Ashcroft's day of reckoning has come. That night, after being provided with baths, fresh clothing, and the first proper meal they'd had in days, Lillian found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. The governor's mansion was luxurious, the guest beds soft and comfortable, yet her mind wouldn't quiet. She rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the moonlit streets of Helena. It was over. Her father would face justice. The documents were safe in Governor Potts' hands. She should feel triumphant, relieved. Instead, she felt oddly hollow. What now? Where would she go? What would she do? A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, she found Jackson standing in the hallway, similarly unable to sleep. I thought you might be awake, he said quietly. May I come in? She nodded, stepping back to allow him entry. In clean clothes, with his hair still damp from bathing, he looked different, less the rugged frontiersman, more the gentleman. But his eyes were the same, storm gray and steady. The governor seems convinced by the documents, he said, standing awkwardly in the center of the room. He's already sent telegrams to federal authorities. Good, Lillian replied. That's good. A silence stretched between them, filled with all the things left unsaid during their journey when survival had been the only priority. What will you do now? Jackson finally asked, echoing her earlier thoughts. Lillian turned back to the window, looking out at the town spread below them. I don't know, she admitted. I hadn't thought beyond getting the documents here. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, smell the clean scent of soap on his skin. You could go east, he said, repeating her own words from their fireside conversation days ago. Start over. She glanced at him, trying to read his expression. I could, she agreed, another silence, heavier this time, or you could stay, he said finally, his voice low and earnest. In Montana, Lillian turned to face him fully. Why would I stay? His eyes met hers, unwavering. Because I'm asking you to, her breath caught. Jackson. I know it's too soon, he continued. We barely know each other, but these past days. He searched for words. I've never met anyone like you, Lillian. Your courage, your determination, your heart. I know what I feel for you is real, even if it happened faster than makes sense. And what do you feel? She asked softly, her own heart racing. Instead of answering with words, he reached out, gently cupping her face in his calloused hands. His eyes asked a question, and her slight nod answered it. When his lips met hers, Lillian felt something long dormant within her bloom to life. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, but deepened as she responded, her hands coming to rest on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Not just in Montana, with me, with Emma. Help us rebuild what your father tried to destroy. I don't know the first thing about ranching, she reminded him, a smile playing at her lips. You'll learn, he said, returning her smile with one of his own. You're stubborn enough, Lillian laughed softly. Is that a compliment from me? Always. His expression grew serious again. I'm not a wealthy man, Lillian. I can't offer you the life you had before. But I can promise you this. You'll never be alone, you'll never be silenced, and you'll never doubt that you're cherished. Tears pricked at her eyes. In all her years as Charles Ashcroft's daughter, surrounded by luxury and privilege, no one had ever offered her what Jackson was offering now: freedom, purpose, and love given freely without conditions. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll stay. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, transforming his entire face. He kissed her again, more deeply this time, his arms encircling her waist, drawing her closer. When they separated, both slightly breathless, he said, I should go. It's not proper for me to be in your room like this, Lillian raised an eyebrow. After everything we've been through, you're worried about propriety now, he laughed, a rich, warm sound she hadn't heard from him before. Fair point, but still. He stepped back reluctantly. Tomorrow is another day, the beginning of something new. As he moved toward the door, Lillian called after him softly. Jackson, he turned, his hand on the doorknob. Yes, thank you, for saying I was under your protection that first day, for meaning it. His expression softened. Always, Lillian, always. After he left, Lillian returned to the window, her heart full in a way it had never been before. Outside, Helena slept under the moonlight, and beyond the city, the vast Montana wilderness stretched toward the horizon, wild, beautiful, and free. Just like the future that now awaited her. 1 month later, Lillian stood on the porch of the newly rebuilt Crosswind Ranch house, watching Jackson and his hired hands work in the corral. The summer sun was warm on her face, the scent of pine and sage sweet in the air. So much had happened in the weeks since they'd reached Helena. Governor Potts had acted swiftly on the evidence she'd provided. Charles Ashcroft now sat in a territorial prison awaiting trial, his empire crumbling as investigators uncovered even more crimes than Lillian had documented. The land he'd stolen was being returned to its rightful owners where possible, or sold at fair prices where the original owners had moved on. Crosswind Ranch had expanded, with Jackson purchasing adjacent acres that had once belonged to neighbors driven out by Ashcroft's tactics. Emma emerged from the house, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. Admiring the view, she asked with a knowing smile, following Lillian's gaze to where Jackson was breaking a spirited young colt. Lillian felt her cheeks warm. The mountains are particularly beautiful today, she replied primly. Emma laughed. Of course that's what you were looking at. She bumped Lillian's shoulder affectionately. The dress is nearly finished, I just need to attach the lace to the collar. Lillian's hand went unconsciously to the simple gold band on her finger, Jackson's mother's ring, which he'd retrieved from a bank in Helena, where it had been kept safe since her death. Their engagement had been announced just 2 weeks after the confrontation with her father, raising eyebrows among Helena society but surprising no one who had witnessed their journey. It doesn't need to be fancy, Lillian said. It's just a small ceremony. It's your wedding, Emma corrected. And you deserve something special, even if the guest list is small. The wedding was planned for the following Saturday, a simple affair with only a few guests, the Mackenzies, who had helped them on their journey, the Millers from the neighboring ranch, Governor Potts, who had insisted on attending, and a handful of others who had become friends in the past weeks. Lillian's gaze returned to Jackson, who had successfully calmed the young horse and was now guiding it around the corral with gentle commands. His shirt was damp with sweat, his face intent on his work. As if sensing her attention, he looked up, meeting her eyes across the distance. His smile, once so rare, now came easily when he saw her. He handed the horse's reins to one of the hands and made his way toward the porch. How's she doing? Lillian asked as he approached, nodding toward the young mare. She'll make a fine riding horse, Jackson replied, spirited but smart. He climbed the porch steps, pausing to kiss her lightly. Like someone else I know. Emma rolled her eyes good-naturedly. If you two are going to be like this, I'm going back to my sewing. As she disappeared into the house, Jackson took Lillian's hand, his thumb rubbing over her engagement ring. Any regrets? He asked quietly. Lillian shook her head. Not one. And it was true, the past month had been a revelation. She discovered strengths she never knew she possessed, learning to ride Western style, helping with the ranch accounts, even assisting Emma with canning vegetables from their garden. The work was hard, the days long, but deeply satisfying in a way her previous life of leisure had never been. Most surprising of all was the sense of belonging she'd found here. The land that had once seemed so wild and threatening now felt like home. The people who had been strangers were becoming family, and Jackson was the center of it all. His quiet strength, his unwavering principles, his tender care for her, these things had only deepened her feelings for him as the weeks passed. I received a letter from the governor today, Jackson said, leaning against the porch railing. Your father's trial is set for next month. They want you to testify. Lillian nodded, having expected this. "I'll go, I need to see this through to the end." "We'll go together," Jackson corrected, squeezing her hand. "You're not facing him alone." The certainty in his voice warmed her from within. This was what she had found with him, not just passion or companionship, but a true partnership. "Have I told you today that I love you?" she asked, smiling up at him. He pretended to consider. "Not since breakfast. I was beginning to worry." Lillian laughed, rising on tiptoes to kiss him properly. "I love you, Jackson Irwin." "And I love you, almost Mrs. Irwin," he replied, his arms encircling her waist. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lillian leaned against Jackson's solid warmth. Content in a way she had never thought possible. From the desperate flight from her father's men to this moment of perfect peace, it had been an extraordinary journey, and it was only beginning. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Montana summer day that seemed made for celebrations. In the small bedroom that had once been Emma's, Lillian stood before a mirror as Emma helped her with the wedding dress they had created together, a simple but elegant creation of cream-colored silk with delicate lace trim. "You look beautiful," Emma said, securing the last pin in Lillian's upswept hair. "My brother won't know what hit him," Lillian smiled nervously. "I still can't believe this is happening." "Having second thoughts?" Emma asked, only half joking. "No," Lillian replied immediately. "No doubts at all. It's just 6 weeks ago I was running for my life. Now I'm getting married, starting a new life so different from anything I ever imagined." Emma squeezed her shoulder. "The best things in life are often the ones we never planned for." A knock at the door interrupted them. Governor Potts, who had arrived the previous evening, entered with a small wrapped package. "Miss Ashcroft," he said warmly, "you look radiant." "Thank you for coming, Governor," Lillian replied. "It means a great deal to us," he smiled, offering her the package, a small wedding gift. "I thought you might like to have it before the ceremony." Curious, Lillian unwrapped the package to find a legal document. As she scanned it, her eyes widened. "This is the deed to your father's house in Helena," the governor confirmed. "The court has awarded it to you as partial restitution. It's yours to do with as you wish." Lillian stared at the document, emotions conflicting within her. The house represented a past she had fled, memories both painful and precious. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to decide anything now," Governor Potts assured her. "But I thought you should know that not everything from your past need be lost." After he left, Emma asked gently, "What will you do with it?" Lillian considered the question. "I don't want to live there," she said finally. "This is my home now." She gestured to the ranch around them. "But perhaps it could be used for something good. A school, maybe, or a home for children without parents." Emma smiled. "I think that's a wonderful idea." Another knock announced the arrival of old Jim Mackenzie, looking uncomfortable but dignified in a clean shirt and string tie. "They're ready for you downstairs, miss," he said. Then, with gruff affection, "You look like an angel." Lillian felt a sudden rush of emotion. When her engagement had been announced, she had written to Mackenzie, asking if he would do her the honor of giving her away, since her own father would not be present. The old mountain man had accepted with surprising emotion, saying it would be the proudest moment of my life, excepting when I married my Mabel. Now he offered his arm with courtly grace that belied his rugged appearance. "Shall we go make an honest man of young Irwin?" Lillian took his arm, her heart full. "Yes," she said simply. "Let's." The ceremony was held in the ranch's newly finished main room where neighbors and friends had gathered. A circuit riding minister performed the service. Jackson waited at the front, looking handsome and slightly nervous in a new suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. When Lillian entered on Mackenzie's arm, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the assembled guests. But Lillian had eyes only for Jackson. The look on his face as he saw her wonder, love, pride was something she knew she would remember until her dying day. The vows were simple and heartfelt. When Jackson promised to cherish and protect her all the days of his life, his voice was strong and sure. When Lillian promised to stand by his side through whatever life might bring, she meant every word with all her heart. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Jackson's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, a pledge of all the days to come. The small gathering erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed was joyous music from a neighbor's fiddle, dancing on the newly constructed porch, food and drink shared with genuine goodwill. Governor Potts regaled guests with the story of how Lillian and the Irwins had outwitted Charles Ashcroft, a tale already becoming something of a legend in the territory. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in spectacular colors, Jackson found Lillian sitting on a bench at the edge of the festivities. "Happy, Mrs. Irwin?" he asked, taking her hand. The name still sent a thrill through her. "Very," she replied. "Though I think your sister has outdone herself with this celebration, she must be exhausted." Jackson chuckled. "Emma's having the time of her life. Look at her." Lillian followed his gaze to where Emma was teaching one of the young ranch hands a dance step, laughing as he stumbled good-naturedly. "She deserves some happiness," Lillian observed. "After everything she did for us." "She does," Jackson agreed, "and she's happy to see us happy." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "I have something for you, a wedding gift." From his pocket, he produced a small wooden box hand-carved with a delicate floral pattern. "I made this," he said, a touch of self-consciousness in his voice. "It's not fine craftsmanship like you might be used to, it's beautiful," Lillian interrupted, running her fingers over the intricate carving. "Truly beautiful. Open it," he encouraged. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a silver pendant in the shape of a compass rose, suspended from a fine chain. "It's to remind you," Jackson said softly. "No matter where life takes us, we'll always find our way home to each other." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes as she lifted the necklace. "Will you put it on me?" He did so, his fingers warm against the nape of her neck. The pendant rested just above her heart, a perfect weight, a tangible reminder of his love. "I have something for you too," she said, reaching into the pocket of her dress. "It's not as beautiful as your gift, but—" She handed him a folded paper. He opened it, his expression puzzled at first, then understanding dawned. "This is a deed," he said, "for the North Pasture land." "The section that belongs to your father," Lillian nodded. "Belonged," she corrected. "The governor helped me arrange it. It's part of my inheritance, separate from the assets frozen for the trial. I've signed it over to you to us." Jackson stared at the paper. The North Pasture was prime grazing land with reliable water sources that would allow them to increase their herd significantly. It was worth a small fortune. "Lillian," he began, shaking his head, "this is too much." "No," she said firmly, "it's exactly right. This land was stolen from people like you by men like my father. Returning it to someone who will care for it properly, who will use it honorably, that feels like justice." He looked at her with such love it nearly took her breath away. "You are an extraordinary woman, Lillian Irwin." She smiled, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the celebration continue around them. "We make a good team, I think." "The best," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. As darkness fell, the party showed no signs of ending, with lanterns being lit and more wood added to the bonfire in the yard. But Jackson stood, offering his hand to his new wife. "Shall we say our good nights?" he suggested, a warmth in his eyes that made Lillian blush. They made their rounds, thanking guests for coming. Emma hugged them both tightly. "Be happy," she whispered to Lillian. "You both deserve it." Under the cover of darkness, they slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand toward the small cabin. Jackson had built a short distance from the main house their private retreat for the first weeks of marriage, until the planned expansion of the main house was complete. Inside, lanterns had already been lit, casting a warm glow over the simple but comfortable space. A bottle of champagne sent by Governor Potts waited in a bucket of cool water, and the bed was turned down, scattered with wildflowers in Emma's romantic touch. "Welcome home," Jackson said softly, closing the door behind them. Lillian turned in a slow circle, taking in the cabin the sturdy furniture Jackson had made himself, the curtains Emma had sewn, the small paintings Lillian had contributed from her own artistic efforts. It was nothing like the grand mansion she had grown up in, with its imported furnishings and staff of servants. It was infinitely better. "Home," she repeated, the word like a prayer on her lips. She turned to Jackson, her husband, and opened her arms. "Yes, I'm finally home." As he gathered her close, his lips finding hers in the lamplight, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she had always been searching for: not protection, not safety, but partnership. Love. A future built on trust and shared purpose. 6 years later, Lillian sat on the expanded porch of Crosswind Ranch, watching her 5-year-old daughter Elizabeth chase butterflies in the summer sunshine. Nearby, Jackson was teaching their 3-year-old son Thomas how to gentle a new foal, the boy's small hand carefully stroking the animal's velvet nose under his father's watchful guidance. Emma emerged from the house, carrying her infant son James, named after his uncle. Her husband Samuel, once a ranch hand and now Jackson's full partner in the thriving cattle operation, followed with a tray of lemonade. "The children from the home will be here tomorrow for their riding lessons," Emma reminded Lillian. "Sarah said there are 3 new girls who have never been on a horse before." Lillian nodded, making a mental note. The Ashcroft Home for Children, established in the mansion that had once been her father's pride, now housed orphans and children from troubled situations. Lillian served on its board of directors, visiting Helena monthly to oversee operations and work with the dedicated staff. Charles Ashcroft had died in prison 3 years earlier, unrepentant to the end. His final words to Lillian, spoken during her last visit before his death, had been a bitter "you'll regret choosing that cowboy over your birthright." She never had. Crosswind Ranch had prospered beyond their wildest expectations. The combination of Jackson's practical knowledge, Lillian's head for business, and Emma and Samuel's hard work had transformed it into one of the most successful operations in the territory. They raised prize cattle, bred excellent horses, and had recently begun experimenting with new agricultural techniques. But more important than material success was the community they had built. Ranch hands and their families lived in good housing on the property. A small schoolhouse had been constructed for the children. Neighboring ranchers, once isolated and vulnerable to men like Charles Ashcroft, now worked together, sharing resources and supporting each other through hard times. "Mama, look." Elizabeth called, racing toward her with wildflowers clutched in her small hand. "For your hair," Lillian accepted the slightly crushed blooms with appropriate admiration. "They're beautiful, sweetheart, thank you." Elizabeth beamed, her eyes storm gray like her father's, alight with pleasure. She scrambled onto Lillian's lap, helping to tuck the flowers into her mother's golden hair, now streaked with a few strands of silver. Across the yard, Jackson looked up from his lesson with Thomas, catching Lillian's eye. Even after 6 years of marriage, that look still made her heart skip. He smiled, a private smile meant only for her, before returning his attention to their son. "You two are still disgustingly in love," Emma observed, settling into the rocking chair beside Lillian. "It's very annoying for the rest of us mere mortals." Lillian laughed, hugging Elizabeth close. "I can't help it if your brother is still the most handsome man in Montana territory." "I heard that," Samuel called from where he was setting down the lemonade, "and I take exception." Emma winked at her husband. "You're a close second, dear." As they shared lemonade in the afternoon sunshine, talking and laughing together, Lillian felt the familiar sense of contentment that had become the foundation of her life. The journey that had begun with a desperate flight from her father's men had led her here to love, to family, to purpose. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and Emma and Samuel had returned to their own home on the property, Lillian and Jackson stood together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. "What are you thinking about?" Jackson asked, his arm around her waist. Lillian leaned against him, drawing strength and warmth from his solid presence. "I was remembering the day we met, when you said I was under your protection." He smiled, the memory clearly as vivid for him as it was for her. "Best decision I ever made, even with all the trouble it brought." She teased gently. "Gunfights, burning barns, dangerous mountain passes, even then." He turned her to face him, his hands cradling her face with the same tenderness he'd always shown her. "I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I," she whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Around them, the land they had nurtured stretched peaceful and productive. Within the house, their children slept safely, dreaming of butterflies and foals. And in each other's arms, Lillian and Jackson Irwin, once strangers brought together by danger and courage, found the same truth they discovered anew each day. That love, freely given and honestly earned, was the greatest protection of all.